There was something about her, something he couldn't quite put his finger on. She was just another employee, another face in the crowd. At least, that's what he told himself. But when Jasmine walked into his office on that fateful Tuesday morning, everything changed. She wasn't like the others. While the women in his life fawned over his wealth, Jasmine didn't seem impressed by his power or status. She was confident, poised, and most importantly, that quiet strength, the way she moved, spoke, and even held herself, it fascinated him. She was ordinary, or so he thought, but soon, she would become the most extraordinary person he had ever known. If you're hooked, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this story with someone who believes in unexpected love. That it was an ordinary Tuesday morning, and Blake Thompson was already deep in his usual routine. He had meetings to attend, calls to make, and emails to respond to. His life was a never-ending cycle of power moves and business deals, where the world was his to control. He didn't have time for distractions, especially not for new hires. But when Jasmine walked into his office, something shifted. He didn't immediately notice her at first. His eyes were glued to the contract in front of him. But when she spoke, her voice was calm and clear, cutting through his concentration like a blade. "Mr. Thompson," she said, standing at the door, "I'm Jasmine, your new head housekeeper. It's an honor to work for you." Blake looked up, his gaze moving from her face down to her clothes. Simple, professional, nothing extravagant. She wasn't wearing a designer dress or heels that screamed wealth. There were no layers of makeup or flashy accessories. In fact, she looked ordinary. Too ordinary for someone who would work in his world of excess and luxury. "Nice to meet you," he replied, his tone polite but distant. He quickly turned his attention back to his paperwork, dismissing her as just another employee in a long line of staff members who would come and go. But there was something about Jasmine that caught him off guard. She wasn't fawning over him, like so many others did. She wasn't there to flatter him, nor did she seem intimidated by his wealth. Instead, she just got to work, efficient, confident, and totally unaffected by the man who was the center of the entire household's universe. Over the next few days, Blake found himself noticing her more and more. She was always punctual, always composed. She hummed gospel songs softly as she worked, her presence calming the chaotic energy of his mansion. She didn't ask for favors, didn't try to engage in idle conversation. She was just there doing her job, and doing it well. And yet Blake couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to her than met the eye. She didn't want anything from him, not his money, not his influence, not his attention. She was different. In a world where people were always after something, her indifference to his wealth intrigued him. In fact, it bothered him. He wasn't used to being ignored, especially by someone like her. Blake couldn't help but think about her, about the way she moved through the house with grace and purpose, how she smiled at the staff with genuine kindness, and how she never once showed awe at his opulent lifestyle. She was just a housekeeper. But to Blake, she had already become more than that. Over the next few weeks, Blake's interest in Jasmine only deepened. He began to notice the small things, the way she made sure every detail was perfect, how she took pride in her work, and how her presence seemed to calm the restless energy of his mansion. She was quiet, but there was something about her calm demeanor that set her apart from everyone else. He tried to ignore it at first, chalking it up to an obsession over someone who was just different. But the more he observed her, the more captivated he became. Jasmine wasn't like the other women he had known. She wasn't impressed by his wealth, his influence, or his social status. She didn't ask for anything, no compliments, no attention, no extravagant gifts. It drove him crazy. Blake wasn't used to being ignored. In his world, wealth and power were supposed to be enough. But for Jasmine, they didn't seem to matter at all. Every attempt he made to engage with her, whether it was complimenting her on her work, inviting her to dinner, or offering a generous raise, was met with the same polite but firm refusal. "Thank you, Mr. Thompson, but I'm just fine," she would say, always with a smile. But there was no spark in her eyes, no hint of the admiration he was used to receiving from people around him. Blake had always been able to get what he wanted. His wealth, charm, and authority had always made him irresistible. But Jasmine was different. He could tell she wasn't swayed by money. So, he began to get creative. The next step in his mind, a car, a brand new, top-of-the-line luxury vehicle. One afternoon, as he found her in the hallway, he casually threw the offer her way. "I thought you might enjoy a new car. It's yours, if you want it." Jasmine paused, looking up at him for the first time with a more serious expression. "I don't need a car, Mr. Thompson," she replied. "I'm quite happy with the one I have." Her refusal stung, and Blake's jaw clenched. He was used to being treated like royalty, and yet here she was, rejecting his gift, as if it were nothing more than a casual gesture. He felt something strange bubble up inside him, irritation, confusion, but most of all, a sense of powerlessness. But he couldn't stop himself. The more she rejected him, the more he wanted to prove that he could win her over, that he could make her care, make her see him for the powerful man he was. He started offering her bigger and better things, a luxury vacation, a generous bonus, tickets to exclusive events, but every time, she politely turned him down. Blake's mind was consumed with thoughts of Jasmine. Why wasn't she interested in him? Wasn't he everything she could want? After all, he had money, prestige, and everything that came with it. So why did she treat him like just another man when all the others treated him like a king? His obsession grew, his frustration deepened. He couldn't understand why this woman, this ordinary woman, had the power to make him feel so ordinary. The more he tried to win her over, the more she slipped through his fingers, and it was driving him to the brink. Blake had it all planned. Another successful deal, another round of celebrations. His office had been filled with business associates, investors, and friends all eager to praise him. Champagne flowed, laughter echoed, and the weight of the evening had him feeling invincible. But somewhere between the clinking glasses and loud chatter, Blake spotted her across the room. Jasmine was standing by the window, her focus far away from the party. As always, a pang of frustration hit him, sharp and unexpected. She'd refused his offers again, dismissed his attempts to impress her with his wealth, and yet he couldn't let her go. She didn't want his money, she didn't want his status. It was maddening. For the first time in his life, Blake didn't feel in control. Blake excused himself from the crowd, pushing through the noise until he was standing right in front of her. She didn't turn at first, but when she did, her calm expression greeted him. "Mr. Thompson," she said, the polite smile on her lips but her eyes revealing nothing. "Jasmine," Blake said, his voice low, controlled, but with an edge to it. "You've been avoiding me." She raised an eyebrow but said nothing, and that silence was enough to send a jolt of anger through him. "Why don't you ever respond to me the way everyone else does?" Blake demanded, stepping closer, his voice growing more insistent. "I've offered you everything, gifts, vacations, money, all the things you should want, yet you turn me down every single time. Don't you know who I am?" Jasmine's eyes narrowed, a flash of something he hadn't seen before, pity. Perhaps before she took a step back, away from him. "I don't want your gifts, Mr. Thompson," she said, her voice calm but firm. "I don't want your wealth. I want respect. Something you don't seem to understand." Blake's heart raced. His pulse throbbed in his temples. He had been used to people adoring him, treating him like a king. But here was Jasmine, the one person who refused to care about his status, and it made him feel small, less than he had ever felt before. "Respect," Blake scoffed. "You think I haven't earned respect? Look around you, Jasmine. I've built this empire. People bow to me." His eyes locked onto hers. "You think you're better than me?" Her response was a simple, quiet statement. "No, Mr. Thompson. I think you're lost." In that moment, something inside him snapped. He had been humiliated in front of everyone, and it was unbearable. The cocktail of alcohol, frustration, and a bruised ego fueled his next words. "Kiss me like you mean it," he said, his voice unsteady but demanding. The room fell silent. For a second, Blake thought she might refuse him outright, walk away and leave him in front of everyone. But instead, Jasmine stood still. Her gaze didn't waver, but her eyes softened as if she was seeing him for the first time. "Mr. Thompson," she said quietly, "I feel sorry for you." Her words cut deeper than anything he had ever experienced. The silence in the room was deafening. People had stopped what they were doing, watching, waiting for his response. But Blake didn't know what to say. He stood there, stunned, feeling a pit of shame opening up beneath him. Jasmine's eyes never left his. "You want something real, but until you stop using others to fill the void in your heart, you'll never get it." And just like that, she walked away. Blake stood frozen in place, his mind reeling. He had never felt so exposed, so completely stripped of his power. Jasmine had said the one thing that shattered him. "I feel sorry for you." Her words echoed in his head like a constant, painful reminder of everything he had ignored in his life. The hollow relationships, the empty victories, and now, the one woman who could see through it all. The night that followed was a blur of empty words and half-hearted congratulations. Blake felt as if he were floating through a dream. He nodded at the praises, shook hands with investors, and accepted compliments from colleagues, but none of it registered. His mind was consumed with the moment Jasmine had spoken those words. "I feel sorry for you." As the celebration continued around him, Blake felt himself becoming smaller and smaller, like the walls of his mansion were closing in on him. He excused himself from the gathering, retreating to his private study. The soft glow of the desk lamp was the only light in the room as he sank into the leather chair, his face buried in his hands. Jasmine's words repeated in his mind like an incessant drumbeat. "I feel sorry for you." She hadn't been angry, hadn't been cruel. She had simply stated it as fact, with a calmness that made it even more cutting. Blake stared at the opulent surroundings of his office, the polished mahogany desk, the view of the city skyline, the shelves lined with trophies and accolades. It was all meaningless. For years, he had built his empire, amassing wealth and power, but it was all just a facade. Jasmine had seen through him in a single moment. He thought about his life, the choices he had made, and the people he had pushed away. He'd spent decades building an empire, but at what cost? His parents had always warned him to focus on relationships, to build connections beyond the boardroom, but he had ignored them. His wealth had become his identity, and everything else had become secondary. But Jasmine had seen him for what he really was, a man who had isolated himself in a world of luxury and control. He had used people for his own gain, manipulated situations to maintain power, and yet, in her eyes, he was nothing more than a hollow man. Blake had been so consumed by his wealth and status that he hadn't realized how lonely he had become. His friendships were transactional, his relationships shallow, and his romantic encounters mean. He had built walls around himself to keep others at a distance, but Jasmine had broken through without even trying. As he sat in the silence of his study, Blake felt something he hadn't felt in years. It was a weight in his chest, a heaviness that made it hard to breathe. He hadn't just lost Jasmine, he had lost himself. The person he had once been, the man who cared about more than just profit, seemed like a distant memory. He spent the rest of the night in his study, replaying every decision he had made, every mistake, and every relationship he had ruined. He thought about the people he had hurt, the friendships he had let slip away, and how he had neglected the one person who had genuinely cared about him, his own self-respect. The realization hit him like a ton of bricks. He had been living a lie. His wealth had given him power, but it hadn't given him peace. His accomplishments had earned him admiration, but it hadn't earned him love. He wanted to change. He wanted to become a better man, not for anyone else, but for himself. Blake knew it wouldn't be easy. His transformation couldn't happen overnight, but the first step was clear. He had to start by acknowledging his flaws, his mistakes, and the damage he had done. It was the only way forward. The hours passed by as Blake sat in the study, alone with his thoughts. And for the first time in a long time, he realized he wasn't afraid of the future. He was ready to face it, to rebuild his life from the ground up. And maybe, just maybe, Jasmine's rejection had been the best thing that had ever happened to him. The days that followed the confrontation were the hardest Blake had ever faced. He woke up each morning with a weight on his chest, the sting of Jasmine's words still fresh in his mind. But there was something else, too, an unfamiliar sense of clarity. He had spent so much of his life trying to control everything, using his wealth to get what he wanted. But now he realized that control had never brought him happiness. It had only built walls between him and the people he needed. The first change was small but meaningful. Blake started by paying attention. It wasn't about what he could buy or how he could impress people. It was about connecting with them. He started learning the names of his staff, asking them about their families, and genuinely listening to their stories. For the first time, he wasn't treating people like assets or tools. He saw them as human beings, each with their own lives and struggles. He wasn't just a boss. He was becoming a part of the larger community around him. Blake's transformation wasn't about grand gestures. It was about the little things. He made sure to greet the staff in the mornings, thank them for their hard work, and acknowledge their contributions. He started offering genuine praise, not just for their work, but for their character. He wanted them to know that they mattered, not because of their position in his life, but because they were worthy of respect. But the real change came with Jasmine. He had no expectations. He wasn't trying to win her over with gifts or displays of wealth. Instead, he focused on showing her that he had changed, that he had learned to appreciate the things that truly mattered. He started leaving her small notes, simple messages of gratitude for her dedication and hard work. Each note was personal, thoughtful, and sincere, nothing flashy, nothing extravagant. At first, Jasmine was cautious. She didn't respond right away, still wary of his past behavior, but she noticed the difference. It wasn't just the notes. Blake's behavior had changed in every interaction. There was no more arrogance, no more condescension. He spoke to her like a peer, treating her with the respect she deserved. And slowly, she began to warm to him. One afternoon, as Jasmine was finishing up her work, Blake approached her with another note, but this time, he didn't hand it to her immediately. Instead, he stood there, waiting for her to look up. "Jasmine," he said quietly, "I want to thank you for everything. You've taught me more than I could have ever learned from my wealth." Her gaze softened as she looked at him, her eyes searching his face for something, maybe sincerity, maybe change. And when she finally nodded, Blake felt a weight lift off his shoulders. It wasn't a grand gesture or an apology. It was simply the acknowledgement that he had learned to be a better man, and she saw it. For the first time in their relationship, Blake felt a connection. It wasn't built on wealth, manipulation, or power. It was built on mutual respect, understanding, and the willingness to change. 6 months had passed since that fateful night, the night when Blake had hit rock bottom and started to rebuild himself. In that time, he had done more than change his outward behavior. He had done the hardest thing of all. He had confronted his own demons, embraced humility, and truly opened himself to the possibility of love. Jasmine had noticed. There were no more notes filled with empty words or extravagant gifts. He didn't need to impress her with his wealth anymore. Blake had become someone different, someone she could respect, someone who had earned her trust not through grand gestures, but through actions that reflected the man he had become. Over the months, their relationship had grown in unexpected ways. It had started with small gestures, kind words, quiet appreciation, and real conversations. Jasmine had let her guard down, just a little. She began to see the man beneath the facade, the man who was capable of love, of kindness, of change. But there was still something missing. Blake knew it. Jasmine knew it. There was one final step, one final gesture that would prove he had truly changed. It was a Saturday afternoon when Blake asked her to meet him in the garden. It was their spot, the place where they had first shared an honest conversation, away from the chaos of his mansion, away from the trappings of wealth. The garden was lush, quiet, and peaceful, just like the man Blake had become. He had spent the morning there, carefully arranging everything, flowers, soft lighting, the place where they had once sat together, just talking. When Jasmine arrived, Blake was already there, waiting by the fountain, his hands nervously clasped in front of him. She stopped in her tracks, her eyes narrowing with curiosity. "Blake?" she asked, her voice tentative. He smiled at her, but there was no arrogance in it, no show of wealth. This smile was soft, genuine. "Jasmine," he began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I've spent the last 6 months learning something I should have known all along. I've been given everything I ever wanted. But none of it mattered until I learned to appreciate the things that truly matter, the people, the connections, and, most importantly, you." Jasmine's eyes softened, but she didn't say anything. Waiting for him to continue, he stepped closer to her, and for a moment, everything seemed to stop. The world faded away, and all that remained was the woman he had learned to love, the woman who had made him a better man. "I'm not the man I was when I first met you," Blake said, his voice low, almost a whisper. "I want to be better. For you, for me, and for the life we could have together." Blake took a deep breath and reached into his pocket. He pulled out a small box, but it wasn't a ring, not yet. Inside the box was a simple, handwritten note, one that spoke to the heart of everything he had learned. Jasmine looked down at the box, her expression unreadable. He opened it, and inside was the note. "You saved my life, Jasmine, not just by loving me, but by teaching me how to love." Blake knelt down before her. No extravagant gestures, no expensive trinkets, just the raw sincerity of a man who had changed. "You made me want to be a better man. I know it's not about what I have or what I can offer. It's about who I've become. Will you marry me?" For a moment, Jasmine didn't speak. The world felt as though it had stopped spinning, and Blake held his breath, waiting for her response. Then slowly, Jasmine's lips curved into a soft smile, and her eyes filled with tears. "Yes," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Yes." As Blake rose to his feet, he felt an overwhelming sense of peace, something he had never known before. He had given her all that he could, his heart, his respect, and his promise to change, and she had accepted it. In that moment, Blake knew that this wasn't just the beginning of their love story. It was the beginning of the life he had always wanted, but never knew how to build. And it was all thanks to the woman who had seen through him, who had taught him what true love and true change really meant. Love isn't about what we can give in material terms, but what we offer from the heart. It's about growth, respect, and the willingness to change. Blake's journey teaches us that true love isn't built on power or possessions, it's built on the connections we make, the authenticity we bring, and the people who challenge us to become better versions of ourselves. If this story resonated with you, and you believe in the power of real love and transformation, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who needs to hear this message. True change starts within, and sometimes the greatest love stories begin when we stop trying to control everything and simply learn to love. Thank you for watching, and we'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Share your story with us.